Greetings, Sarah Scholars. It's good to see you all. I thought we could start off the week by having a read aloud. And so I thought I would read chapter 14, A Funny Kind of Peace, in I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai to you all today.
Chapter 14, A Funny Kind of Peace. When my brother's schools reopened after the winter break, Kushal said he would rather stay at home like me. I was cross. You don't realize how lucky you are, I told him. It felt strange to have no school. We didn't even have a television set, as someone had stolen ours while we were in Islamabad, using my father's getaway ladder to get inside. Someone gave me a copy of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, a fable about a shepherd boy who travels to the pyramids in search of treasure when all the time it's at home. I loved that book and read it over and over again. When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you achieve it, it says. I don't think that Paulo Coelho had come across the Taliban or our useless politicians. What I didn't know was that High Kakar was holding secret talks with Fazlullah and his commanders. He had got to know them in interviews and was urging them to rethink their ban on girls' education. Listen, Maulana, he told Fazlullah, you killed people, you slaughtered people, you beheaded people, you destroyed schools, and still there was no protest in Pakistan. When you banned girls' education, people spoke out. Even the Pakistan media, which has been so soft on you till now, is outraged. The pressure from the whole country worked, and Fazlullah agreed to lift the ban for girls up to 10 years old, year 4. I was in year 5, and some of us pretended we were younger than we were. We started going to school again, dressed in ordinary clothes and hiding our books under our shawls. It was risky, but it was the only ambition I had back then. We were lucky, too, that Madame Miriam was brave and resisted the pressure to stop working. She had known my father since she was 10, and they trusted each other completely. She used to signal to him to wind up when he spoke for too long, which was often. The secret school is our silent protest, she told us. I didn't write anything about it in my diary. If they had caught us, they would have flogged or even slaughtered us as they had Shabana. Some people are afraid of ghosts, some of spiders or snakes. In those days, we were afraid of our fellow human beings. On the way to school, I sometimes saw the Taliban with their caps and long, dirty hair. Most of the time, they hid their faces. They were awkward, horrible looking. The streets of Mingora were as empty as a third of the inhabitants had left the valley. My father said you couldn't really blame people for leaving as the government had no power. There were now 12,000 army troops in the region, 4 times as many as their estimates of the Taliban, along with tanks, helicopters, and sophisticated weapons. Yet 70% of Swat was under Taliban control. About a week after we had returned to school, on the 16th of February, 2009, we were woken one night by the sound of gunfire. Our people traditionally fire rifles in celebration of births and weddings, but even that had stopped during the conflict. So at first we thought we were in danger. Then we heard the news. The gunfire was in celebration. A peace deal had been struck between the Taliban and the provincial government, which was now under the control of the ANP, not the mullahs. The government had agreed to impose Sharia law throughout Swat, and in return, the militants would stop fighting. The Taliban agreed to a 10-day truce and, as a peace gesture, released a Chinese telephone engineer who they had kidnapped 6 months before. We were happy, too. My father and I had often spoken in favor of a peace deal, but we questioned how it would work. People hoped that the Taliban would settle down, go back to their homes, and live as peaceful citizens. They convinced themselves that the Shariat in Swat would be different to the Afghan version. We would still have our girls' schools, and there would be no morality police. Swat would be Swat, just with a different justice system. I wanted to believe this, but I was worried. I thought, surely how the system works depends on the people overseeing it, the Taliban. And it was hard to believe it was all over. More than 1,000 ordinary people and police had been killed. Women had been kept in purdah. Schools and bridges had been blown up. Businesses had closed. We had suffered barbaric public courts and violent justice and had lived in a constant state of fear, and now it was all to stop? At breakfast, I suggested to my brothers that we should talk of peace now and not of war. As ever, they ignored me and carried on with their war games. Kushal had a toy helicopter and Atal a pistol made of paper, and one would shout, "Fire!" and the other, "Take position!" I didn't care. I went and looked at my uniform, happy that I would soon be able to wear it openly. A message came from our headmistress that exams would take place in the first week of March. It was time to get back to my books. Our excitement did not last long. Just 2 days later, I was on the roof of the Taj Mahal Hotel giving an interview about the peace deal to a well-known reporter called Hamid Mir when we got the news that another TV reporter we knew had been killed. His name was Musa Khan Kel, and he had often interviewed my father. That day he had been covering a peace march led by Sufi Muhammad. It wasn't really a march, but a cavalcade of cars. Afterwards, Musa Khan's body was found nearby. He had been shot several times and his throat partly slit. He was 28 years old. My mother was so upset when we told her that she went to bed in tears. She was worried that violence had returned to the valley so soon after the peace deal. Was the deal merely an illusion, she wondered? A few days later, on the 22nd of February, a permanent ceasefire was announced by Deputy Commissioner Saeed Javid at the Swat Press Club in Mingora. He appealed to all Swatis to return. The Taliban spokesman, Muslim Khan, then confirmed they had agreed an indefinite ceasefire. President Zardari would sign the peace deal into law. The government also agreed to pay compensation to the families of victims. Everyone in Swat was jubilant, but I felt the happiest because it meant school would reopen properly. The Taliban said girls could go to school after the peace agreement, but they should be veiled and covered. We said, okay, if that's what you want, as long as we can live our lives. Not everyone was happy about the deal. Our American allies were furious. I think that Pakistan government is basically abdicating to the Taliban and the extremists, said Hillary Clinton, the U.S. Secretary of State. The Americans were worried the deal meant surrender. The Pakistani newspaper Dawn wrote in an editorial that the deal sent a disastrous signal: fight the state militarily and it will give you what you want and get nothing in return. But none of those people had to live here. We needed peace, whoever brought it. In our case, it happened to be a white-bearded militant called Sufi Mohammed. He made a peace camp in Dur and sat there in our famous mosque, Tabligh Markaz, like the master of our land. He was the guarantor that the Taliban would lay down their arms and there would be peace in the valley. People visited him to pay homage and kiss his hand because they were tired of war and suicide bombings. In March, I stopped writing my blogs as Hai Kakar thought there was not much more to say. But to our horror, things didn't change much. If anything, the Taliban became even more barbaric. They were now state-sanctioned terrorists. We were disillusioned and disappointed. The peace deal was merely a mirage. One night, the Taliban held what we called a flag march near our street and patrolled the roads with guns and sticks as if they were the army. They were still patrolling the China Bazaar. One day, my mother went shopping with my cousin as she was getting married and wanted to buy things for her wedding. A Talib accosted them and blocked their way. "If I see you again wearing a scarf but no burqa, I will beat you," he said. My mother is not easily scared and remained composed. "Yes, okay, we will wear burqas in future," she told him. My mother always covers her head, but the burqa is not part of our Pashtun tradition. We also heard that Taliban had attacked a shopkeeper because an unaccompanied woman was not looking at the lipsticks in his beauty shop. There is a banner in the market saying women are not allowed to be in your shop unaccompanied by a male relative, and you have defied us, they said. He was badly beaten and nobody helped him. One day I saw my father and his friends watching a video on his phone. It was a shocking scene. A teenage girl wearing a black burqa and red trousers was lying face down on the ground being flogged in broad daylight by a bearded man in a black turban. "Please stop it," she begged in Pashto, in between screams and whimpers as each blow was delivered. "In the name of Allah, I am dying. You could hear the Taliban shouting, "Hold her down, hold her hands down." At one point during the flogging, her burqa slips, and they stop for a moment to adjust it, then carry on beating her. They hit her 34 times. A crowd had gathered but did nothing. One of the woman's relatives even volunteered to help hold her down. A few days later, the video was everywhere. A woman filmmaker in Islamabad got hold of it, and it was shown on Pakistan TV over and over, and then around the world. People were rightly outraged, but this reaction seemed odd to us, as it showed they had no idea of the awful things going on in our valley. I wished their outrage extended to the Taliban's banning of girls' education. Prime Minister Yousafzai Gilani called for an inquiry and made a statement saying the flogging of the girl was against the teachings of Islam. Islam teaches us to treat women politely, he said. Some people even claimed the video was fake. Others said that the flogging had taken place in January before the peace deal and had been released now to sabotage it. But Muslim Khan confirmed it was genuine. She came out of her house with a man who was not her husband, so we had to punish her, he said. Some boundaries cannot be crossed. Around the same time in April, another well-known journalist called Sahid Hussein came to Swat. He went to visit the DC at his official residence and found him hosting what appeared to be a celebration of the Taliban takeover. There were several Taliban commanders with armed escorts, including Muslim Khan and even Sufi Muhammad, the leader of the militants in Bajor, who were in the middle of a bloody fight with the army. Fakir had a $200,000 bounty on his head, yet there he was, sitting in the government official's house, having dinner. We also heard that an army brigadier went to prayers led by Fazlullah. "There cannot be two swords in one sheath," said one of my father's friends. "There cannot be two kings in one land. Who is in charge here, the government or Fazlullah?" But we still believed in peace. Everyone was looking forward to a big outdoor public meeting on the 20th of April, when Sufi Muhammad would address the people of Swat. We were all home that morning. My fathers and brothers were standing outside when a group of teenage Taliban went past, playing victory songs on their mobiles. "Oh, look at them, Abba," said Kushal. "If I had a Kalashnikov, I would kill them." It was a perfect spring day. Everyone was excited because they had hoped Sufi Muhammad would proclaim peace and victory and ask the Taliban to lay down their arms. My father didn't attend the gathering. He watched it from the roof of Surash Academy, the school run by his friend Ahmad Shah, where he and other activists often gathered in the evenings. The roof overlooked the stage, so some media had set up their cameras there. There was a huge crowd, between 30,000 and 40,000 people wearing turbans and singing Taliban and jihadi songs. "It was complete Talibanistation and humming," said my father. Liberal progressives like him did not enjoy the singing and chanting. They thought it was toxic, especially at times like this. Sufi Muhammad was sitting on the stage with a long queue of people waiting to pay homage. The meeting started with recitations from the chapter of victory, a surah from the Quran, followed by speeches from different leaders in the 5 districts of our valley: Kohistan, Malakan, Shangla, Upper Dur, and Lower Dur. They were all very enthusiastic, as one was hoping to be made the Amir of their district so they could be in charge of imposing Sharia. Later, these leaders would be killed or thrown in jail, but back then they dreamed of power. So everyone spoke with great authority, celebrating like the prophet when he conquered Mecca through a speech was one of forgiveness, not cruel victory. Then it was Sufi Muhammad's turn. He was not a good speaker. He was very old and seemed in poor health and rambled on for 45 minutes. He said totally unexpected things, as if he had someone else's tongue in his mouth. He described Pakistan's courts as un-Islamic and said, "I consider Western democracy a system imposed on us by the infidels. Islam does not allow democracy or elections." Sufi Muhammad said nothing about education. He didn't tell the Taliban to lay down their arms and leave the Hujras. Instead, he appeared to threaten the whole nation. "Now wait, we are coming to Islamabad," he shouted. We were shocked. It was like when you pour water onto a blazing fire, the flames are suddenly extinguished. People were bitterly disappointed and started abusing him. "What did the devil say?" people asked. "He's not for peace, he wants more killing." My mother put it best. "He had the chance to be the hero of history, but didn't take it," she said. Our mood on the way home was the exact opposite of what we had felt on the way to the meeting. And told Kamran Khan that That night my father spoke on Geo TV and told Kamran Khan that people had high hopes but were disappointed. Sufi Muhammad didn't do what he should have done. He was supposed to seal the peace deal with a speech calling for reconciliation and an end to violence. People had different conspiracy theories about what had happened. Some said Sufi Muhammad hadn't gone mad. Others said he had been ordered to deliver this speech and been warned, if you don't, there are 4 or 5 suicide bombers who will blast you and everyone here. People said he had looked uneasy on stage before he spoke. They muttered about hidden hands and unseen forces. What does it matter, I wondered. The point is, we are a Taliban state. My father was again busy speaking at seminars on our troubles with the Taliban. At one, the information minister for our province said Talibanization was the result of our country's policy of training militants and sending them to Afghanistan, first to fight the Russians, then to fight the Americans. If we had not put guns in the hands of madrasa students at the behest of foreign powers, we would not be facing this bloodbath in the tribal areas in Swat, he said. It soon became clear that the Americans had been right in their assessment of the deal. The Taliban believed the Pakistani government had given in, and they could do what they liked. They streamed into Buner, the next district to the southeast of Swat, and only 65 miles from Islamabad. People in Buner had always resisted the Taliban, but they were ordered by the local authorities not to fight as the militants arrived with their RPGs and guns. The police abandoned their posts, saying the Taliban had superior weapons and people fled. The Taliban set up Sharia courts in all districts and broadcast sermons from mosques calling on the local youth to join them. Just as they had in Swat, they burned TV sets, pictures, DVDs, and tapes. They even took control of the famous shrine of a Sufi saint, Pir Baba, which was a pilgrimage site. People would visit to pray for spiritual guidance, cures for their ailments, and even happy marriages for their children. But now, it was locked and bolted. People in the lower districts of Pakistan became very worried as the Taliban moved toward the capital. Everyone seemed to have the video of the girl in the black burqa being flogged, and were asking, is this what we want in Pakistan? Militants had killed Benazir, blown up the country's best-known hotel, killed thousands of people in suicide bombings and beheadings, and destroyed hundreds of schools. What more would it take for the army and government to resist them? In Washington, the government of President Obama had just announced it was sending 21,000 more troops to Afghanistan to turn round the war against the Taliban. But now they seem to be more alarmed about Pakistan than Afghanistan, not because of girls like me in my school, but because our country has more than 200 nuclear warheads, and they were worried about who was going to control them. They talked about stopping their billions of dollars in aid and sending troops instead. At the start of May, our army launched Operation True Path to drive the Taliban out of Swat. We heard they were dropping hundreds of commandos from helicopters into the mountains in the north. More troops appeared in Wingora, too. This time they would clear the town. They announced over megaphones that all residents should leave. My father said we should stay, but the gunfire kept us awake most nights. Everyone was in a continuous state of anxiety. One night we were woken up by screaming. We had recently got some pets, 3 white chickens and a white rabbit that one of Kushal's friends had given him, and which we let wander around the house. Atal was only 5 then and really loved that rabbit, so it used to sleep under my parents' bed. But it used to wee everywhere, so that night we put it outside. Around midnight, a cat came and killed it. We all heard the rabbit's agonized cries. Atal would not stop weeping. "Let the sun come and I will teach that cat a lesson tomorrow," he said. "I will kill him." It seemed like a bad omen. End of chapter 14. Also, forgive me for any mispronunciations.